We begin this morning with the arrest overnight of the suspect in that mass shooting in Atlanta.
Yeah, that man is 24-year-old Deon Patterson. Police say earlier in the day he opened fire inside a hospital, killing one woman and injuring another 4. The suspect then ran off, leading to an hours-long manhunt. The city was put on lockdown as police looked for him. Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock called on the Senate to take action.
Thoughts and prayers are not enough. And in fact, it is a contradiction to say that you are thinking and praying and then do nothing. It is to make a mockery of prayer.
The woman killed in the shooting has been identified as 39-year-old Amy St. Pierre. She worked as an employee for the CDC. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky has the latest for us this morning.
Yeah, good morning. It began with a shooting inside an Atlanta hospital and then resulted in a nearly day-long manhunt that finally ended late yesterday when authorities took 24-year-old Deon Patterson into custody and booked him here into Fulton County Jail without incident. And we're learning more about what took place yesterday when authorities say Patterson walked inside Northside Hospital for an appointment, accompanied by his own mother, proceeded to the 11th floor. And that is where investigators say he pulled out a handgun and started opening fire. In this hail of bullets, we know that 5 women were struck, one of them fatally, as Patterson shot a handgun before fleeing that scene. Now, late last night, investigators were clear to say that the public was critical in providing updates as to his potential location, and it was actually license plate recognition cameras that recognized a car authorities believe Patterson stole from a parking garage about 20 miles away from the hospital. That helped them direct this manhunt. And when they arrived at a Cobb County condo complex, authorities say it was actually an undercover police officer who identified Patterson, and they were able to move him and arrest the 24-year-old without incident. Now, as for any motive in this shooting, that is still unknown at this time. His mother did share with authorities that he was on anxiety medication. We have learned that Patterson was discharged from the Coast Guard as recently as this past January, but he has shared little, if anything, to authorities, and as for right now, remains booked inside Fulton County Jail. Morgan Chesky, NBC News.
All right,
Atlanta.
thank you, Morgan.
For more on this, let's bring in NBC News analyst and retired ATF special agent in charge, Jim Cavanaugh. Jim, thanks for being with us this morning. Let's start with this manhunt. It was hours long. It puts this major city, Atlanta, in lockdown while they were doing it. How necessary was that to finding the suspect and trying to keep people safe?
Well, I think it was critical, Savannah. I think the Atlanta PD did a good job here. They communicated with the public. They did get the picture of the suspect out from the video pretty quick. They told everybody he was loose because they picked it up on the video from the hospital. So they knew he'd, egressed the scene within just a couple of minutes of the murder and the shootings. So that was a good move, locking it down. Then they picked up the carjacking, took it to Cobb County. Very good police work, and ultimately used a plainclothes officer, an undercover officer, which is routine business in police business to use plainclothes officers when you have violent suspects afoot, because you can send them in to kind of be your eyes ahead before they see the uniformed cars or uniformed officers. You spot the fugitive or the wanted person, and then you can make your move. So it was good work by Cobb County, good work by Atlanta PD, and everybody concerned. But of course, it doesn't bring any of it doesn't bring the people who were wounded back to normal, or bring us back the person who was killed.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, you mentioned that photo that they were able to use in a press conference last night. Police had revealed that they used cameras from the transportation department to find the suspect and to have that image. First, let's listen to more of what they had to say.
If you rewind the hand of time 4 years, we probably would not be where we are today right now. Technology played a huge role, but technology doesn't do any good without people who are determined to capture an individual that would do something like this. And today we saw where those two things came together in an amazing way.
Jim, help us understand just how important tech is becoming in dealing with mass shootings. What is this technology? What are these developments helping us be able to do?
Well, just take this case, license plate readers that can be in fixed locations around the city. These are extremely valuable to the police. Of course, police cars can have them as well. And when that license plate hits that reader, it kicks out the alert to the officers. It's tremendous technology. And what the chief was talking about here was a real-time crime center. Real-time crime centers, coordinate that information. They bring other agencies together. They have a center. All that information is relayed to, ranking lieutenants and officers who can make decisions for real-time unfolding violent events. In the past, maybe we just had, dispatchers in the center. Now, in a real-time crime center, you have, police officers, commanders, people who can direct people to go certain places, officers, plainclothes, SWAT, detectives. So real-time crime, as it's breaking and the violence is unfolding, the police are sitting there with the technology and they can dispatch to make the city safer. That's what they did here. That's what they did in Cobb County, and that's what the chief was lauding. He was talking about how well that system worked. Many cities have these. They're very, very helpful.
Jim, after a tragedy like this, of course, people wonder, why would this happen? That's also one of the most difficult questions to answer, the motive. Where does the investigation go from here in terms of figuring that out just quickly?
Well, I think really the investigation is really going to center mostly on his culpability, the evidence that it's him, the photographs, the witnesses, because he's going to be prosecuted for capital murder. So that's going to be the bulk of it. Motive's going to turn out that he's, unhappy with his treatment, or he didn't get the drugs he wanted, or somehow he's mad. And, he's just going to be a person who used a gun to, get what he wants, or threw his tantrum and resulted in capital murder. It's a pretty hard thing to fix. But he's ruined lives, and he's ruined his own.
Jim Cavanaugh, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks.
This morning, Ukraine is dealing with the aftermath of another series of Russian drone attacks. Ukrainian officials say their air defenses shot down the majority of the drones that targeted Kyiv, but some did manage to land in Odessa. No casualties were reported there. It comes one day after Moscow accused Kyiv of attempting to assassinate Russian President Vladimir Putin in a drone attack on the Kremlin. Now, this video is one of several circulating on Russian social media. It appears to show an object flying toward the Kremlin roof before exploding. Moscow says the drones were disabled. There were no injuries. Ukraine's government has denied any involvement. NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber joins us now from Kyiv with the latest. So, Ellison, let's walk us through what we know about this incident at the Kremlin, the reaction from both Russia and Ukraine. And we understand the Kremlin now blaming the U.S. as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has happened in the last 24 hours, Joe. Ukrainian officials are adamantly denying any involvement in this alleged drone attack on the Kremlin. Russia so far has provided no evidence of this attack. The videos that you referenced, that's really all we have at this point, and those first started surfacing on social media. Ukrainian officials, they are saying, we didn't know about this. We had nothing to do with this. These are not our drones. And they're accusing Russia of essentially trying to set them up. On top of that, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says we do not have weapons to spare to even try something like this. Other officials have said, how would this possibly benefit us on the battlefield? Listen.
We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities. We don't have, enough weapons for this. That's why we don't use it anywhere. For us, that is the deficit. We can't spend it. And we didn't attack Putin.
And Joe, you mentioned the latest reaction we're hearing from the Kremlin. A spokesperson for President Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Peskov, was asked to respond to Kyiv's denials, and also the U.S.'s pushback from the Secretary of State, who said to take anything in this situation coming from Russia with a large salt shaker. He said this in part, quote, attempts to disown this both in Kyiv and Washington are ridiculous. He went on to say Kyiv only does what it is told to do. Often even the goals themselves are not determined by Kyiv Kyiv, but they are determined in Washington and then brought to Kyiv so that Kyiv simply fulfills. But you now also have a third party here, a non-governmental organization siding with Ukraine. The Institute for the Study of War says it is highly unlikely that Ukraine was involved in these attacks. They say that they believe this is something that Russia likely staged internally to try and cater to a Russian domestic audience, to try and further make mobilizations throughout society. They say one of the reasons for believing that is that Russia has upped their air defense system. So they say it's highly unlikely that 2 drones could get to the heart of the Kremlin. Joe?
So, Ellison, we're also following President Zelensky's trip to the Netherlands. We know that he's been speaking at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. What's his main message there?
He is saying this court has to hold President Putin accountable. He's saying that this is a historical necessity, telling the court, quote, only one institution is capable of responding to the original crime, the crime of aggression, a tribunal, not some compromise that will allow politicians to say that the case is allegedly done, but a true, really true, full-fledged tribunal. Speaking about Putin, he said that this is an individual who deserves to be sanctioned for his criminal actions here in the capital of criminal law. Joe?
All right. Ellison Barber in Kyiv. Ellison, thank you.
Let's turn to some financial news now. There are new questions this morning about the future of the nation's economy. It comes after the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to a 16-year high yesterday. Now, this was the 10th consecutive rate hike since March 2022, all part of an effort to try to tame inflation.
We remain strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year. Nonetheless, inflation pressures continue to run high, and the process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go.
Joining us for more on this is Sarah Foster. She's an analyst for Bank Rate. Hey, Sarah, good morning. Thank you for being here. So tell us, what should we know about this latest rate hike? How does this affect us right now in the short term?
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. I think as far as how this rate hike impacts us in the short term, for borrowers, it just means that interest rates are going to get a little bit higher, especially for those home equity loans, those HELOCs, as well as, used car loans, which, for instance, have gotten already to a 12-year high. But I think, in the long term, what Powell really indicated, and I think what the biggest news from the press conference is almost what Powell, didn't say. Fed officials are no longer saying that they're expecting additional policy firming, which is code for more rate hikes. And so it essentially means that they're opening the door to a pause.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you more about that in just a minute in terms of what to expect going forward. First, I just mentioned 10th consecutive rate hike since March of last year. Ultimately, that is a 5% increase in those 10 months. Tell us the wider impact that's had on our economy. What challenges has that caused for people at home?
Well, the immediate place that we're seeing these higher interest rates impact the economy has really been in the housing market. We've seen affordability issues become an even bigger concern for Americans who are already dealing with elevated home prices. But then also, we've already started to see the job market slow, and it's indicating signs that it's losing steam. We just got a report from the Department of Labor yesterday that basically showed that job openings are falling, layoffs are ticking up. Even the quits rate, which has long been regarded as a sign of economic confidence, that's starting to slow. And of course, we see another look at the labor market tomorrow with the monthly jobs report. So I think what we're seeing really is a slowing economy. Whether that means a recession is still kind of, a main question. Chair Powell has obviously indicated that he still isn't expecting that.
Right. Yeah, it's been an open question for 10 months now. I mean, the Fed, they've been navigating a really tough economy. High inflation, which is sort of what this rate hike is supposed to try to tackle. But then also we've seen this troubled banking sector with multiple banks ultimately collapsing. And then also Washington in this deadlock over raising the debt ceiling. They have indicated, the Fed has indicated that this might have been the last rate increase, as you just mentioned a minute ago, that we'll see for a while. But what do you think we should expect going forward?
Well, I think what we see for the Fed is really this new era. For the first time, they're looking for reasons not to continue raising interest rates. Before, we were in this era where the Fed was looking for continuing reasons to hike by the traditional 25 basis points or even higher. So I think this is really signaling that the Fed is a little bit more cautious because, as they did note during the press conference, we would like to see how much tightening those 3 bank failures that we've gotten this year will continue impacting the economy. And of course, some estimates from economists already say that it could be the equivalent to 1.5 percentage points of extra rate hikes.
Wow. All right, Sarah, thank you so much.
Great.
New developments this morning in connection with a series of recent stabbings in the college town of Davis, California. Police say they have detained a person of interest for questioning. Over the past 5 days, there have been 3 stabbings in the area. 2 people were killed and another was injured.
The civil rape case against former President Donald Trump continues today, but Trump's lawyers have revealed that they will not be calling any witnesses to the stand in his defense.
The plaintiffs, on the other hand, have a lengthy list of witnesses who they prepared to bring to the stand. Mr. Trump has continuously denied the decades-old rape allegation made against him by writer E. Jean Carroll. NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos joins us now. So, Danny, we weren't surprised to hear that former President Trump was not going to testify, but the fact that the defense is calling no witnesses, what do you make of that?
In a criminal case, it's not uncommon to call 0 witnesses. I do it all the time in criminal cases, and that's because the burden is on the prosecution. And you can argue that in your closing. In a civil case, the burden is much lighter for the plaintiff. But yet, the defense's decision to call 0 witnesses, I think, is consistent with their theme that they consider this case a big nothing. That's the gambit that they've gone with. And that's why I think you saw Joe Tacopina take a very aggressive stance, a very aggressive approach in cross-examining E. Jean Carroll. They don't want the jury to think that they're treating a victim with kid gloves. They want the jury to think this person is a liar and that this case has no value, and that's why they're calling no witnesses. It's a risk. It's a gamble. But if successful, then it might work with the jury because it's consistent with their theme. They think of E. Jean Carroll as a liar, and they're calling no witnesses because this is a nothing case.
So as Joe mentioned, it wasn't a surprise that we didn't actually see Trump on the stand there. We also aren't seeing the witnesses, but they did hear this taped deposition. What happened there?
So this is what I thought the defense was going to do from the beginning, and that is raise the specter of Donald Trump possibly coming in to testify. And when you do that, there's a strategy to that, because you keep certain members of the plaintiff's team working, burning the midnight oil, putting together their cross-examination if Donald Trump enters through those doors and takes the witness stand. You burn the other side's resources. But look, I told you this weeks ago. I don't even think this was a major prediction. Trump was never going to testify because the deposition transcript is a known quantity. You know what's in that transcript. There are no surprises. They can play it. And by the way, even some of the excerpts show how Donald Trump's way of, let's say, mincing the English language or answering and not answering questions the way he wants to works to his favor. In one excerpt, for example, he says something to the effect of, why didn't she report it right away? Look at how he got in a piece of evidence that is something that normally might not be admissible, but that's because he answers every question the way he wants to answer it instead of answering the question asked. So that might be a little win for Trump, but still in the long haul, I think this is the defense's approach. They are conceding a possible loss in this case and avoiding the possible disaster of him coming in and testifying live without a net.
Let's talk about the prosecution's strategy so far. E. Jean Carroll expected to wrap up their side today. How do you sum up the arguments they've made, and then what would we expect from them on their last day of presenting their case?
If I'm E. Jean Carroll's team, I am going to focus somewhat on the plaintiff's testimony, but I don't think that was the strongest piece of evidence. They got in essentially what's called character evidence. They were lucky enough to get in evidence of other women complaining that Donald Trump had assaulted them. This is such powerful evidence that it is strictly restrained by the rules of evidence. And so huge win for the plaintiff getting this evidence in. This This is what I would focus on in the closing, and the psychologist's testimony that people who are assaulted often compartmentalize it. They often hide it. They often do not report because they are afraid of their assailant. And boy, is there anyone you could be more afraid of in terms of influence than the then real estate magnate and future president of the United States, Donald Trump. On the defense, their theme has always been the same. This person's a liar. It's not a victim that we need to treat nicely. She's a big liar, and that's what they're going to hammer over and over again in their closing.
Danny Ceballos, as always, we appreciate you.
Time for a check on your morning news now. Weather forecast.
That's right. That means Angie Lassman is here with us. Hi, Angie. Good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning. I got good news for you when it comes to the weekend. For a lot of folks, it's going to feel really spring-like, but we've got to get through some bumpy kind of weather over the next day or so before we get to that. And that'll specifically be centered over parts of the plains as we have a system that's going to work a little farther to the east. It does bring some rain to parts of the Rockies through the day today, but it'll also bring that potential for some strong to severe storms, again, stretched through the plains, specifically Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, as we get into the afternoon and even evening hours tonight. By the time we get into tomorrow, we could see some more strong storms into parts of Texas and the Mississippi Valley. We'll also see some rain working through the Midwest. So a couple of things to note that might impact you for your Thursday and your Friday activities. Here's your Thursday threats when it comes to severe. We're mainly looking at the potential for some large and damaging hail up to 2 inches in size. It will also have the potential for some strong wind gusts. Those could be up to 60 miles per hour, and we can't rule out tornadoes. And again, it expands, stretching from parts of Kansas through Oklahoma, including Oklahoma City, Dallas, Austin. All of those locations could see some of that larger hail. Where you see the brighter blue, that's where we could have the potential for the baseball size hail. So if you live in some of these places, something to note and stay connected about here through the afternoon hours, because we likely could see some of these alerts coming down into the afternoon and even into the evening too. By the time we get into tomorrow, you see the two areas that we're watching. I mentioned part of Texas and as well as the Mississippi Valley. Tomorrow, the tornado threat is low, but the hail threat will still be there, as well as the wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. When we're talking hail, it's mainly going to be just south of Fort Worth, but including places like Waco, Hamilton, Brady. So again, another day for Texas to watch for some severe weather into your Friday. Rain-wise, it's not all that impressive, but we could see anywhere from an inch to maybe isolated amounts higher than that in places like Fayetteville, up through North Platte, as well as this system makes its way to the east. And here's the good news, and it's not today's weather, or today's temperatures, I should say, but it's what happens over the coming days, because we once again are going to be chilly in New York. 59 degrees today, 57 for Pittsburgh, 64 for Detroit. These numbers are well below normal for this time of year. And even tomorrow, we only see slight improvements in a lot of spots. Boston at 53 degrees. New York finally makes it into the low 60s. But check out this weekend, just in time for Saturday, we're going to be into the high 60s in New York. We'll end up into the low 70s for Washington, D.C., and we're near 80 by the time we get into our next work week in D.C. Meanwhile, Cincinnati, you guys are going to end up at 80 degrees on Sunday. So it'll be some more spring-like conditions. That omega block that we've been talking about all week long is going to finally start to deteriorate and loosen up, and we'll have some nicer conditions, milder conditions across the Northeast and the Midwest in the coming days, guys. Just in time for the weekend.
Oh, I was just going to say, coming days this weekend. There we go, Angie.
We already made brunch plans for this weekend.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Angie.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.